Hi, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Commons in Conversation, an interview series in which we talk to philanthropy and nonprofit leaders and experts about the ways in which people are trying to bridge divisions in America, which can include anything from politics, race, class, income level, geography, all sorts of things. My name is Nandita Raghuram. I'm the Deputy Opinion Editor at the Chronicle of Philanthropy. I am so thrilled to be joined today by Barbara Kingsolver, a Pulitzer Prize-winning author whose fiction often explores how people can and can't come together across divisions. In so many of her books, Kingsolver's characters often seem to be thrust together with people who are very different from them, from different parts of the country, different races, different income levels, or they have wildly different beliefs. Her most recent book, which she won the Pulitzer for, Damon Copperhead, explores, among other things, the urban-rural divide. I have to confess, Demon Copperhead is one of my favorite books. The main character, Demon, is just so arresting. He's intelligent, he's caring. He has a really fascinating way of seeing and describing the world. He's also very flawed in many ways. And as a reader, I found myself rooting for him as he succeeds, crying when he doesn't, particularly because you spend 500 pages or so watching him grow up from a young boy to an adult. So a long time. And as someone who isn't from Appalachia, where Demon lives, the book helped me see the region and the people who live there in a new light. And I imagine readers from Appalachia could also see themselves reflected in the book in a more nuanced way. Barbara, welcome, and thank you so much for joining us. I'm so thrilled to be chatting with you. My first question, so much of Demon Copperhead is about exploring the urban-rural divide, as I said, or the ways in which city people look down on country people. That's something that comes up often in the book. Can you talk a little bit about where this disdain comes from?
Sure. Well, first, thank you for inviting me here into this conversation. And second, congratulations on pronouncing Appalachia correctly.
I had to
Um,
listen to you pronounce it to make sure.
well, most people don't, and I think that's a good starting point. The fact that there's this huge region of the country that outs everyone outside of this region pronounces wrong. I mean, imagine if people said Chicago or Brookline, or well, there is a Brookline, but you know what I'm saying. The fact that people say Appalachia, they even people even correct me
Mhm.
when I go out, into the world and talk about my home. And the fact that people don't even know how to pronounce this huge place tells you we are not represented in mainstream culture. Or if we are represented, it's somebody else representing, talking about us, portraying us without an understanding of who we are. People who are not from here talking about us, showing us. This is just such a part of American culture. It's my whole life I have endured these stereotypes about Appalachia from the time I grew up in Kentucky, in a really little town in Kentucky, thought it was a fine place to be from, went to college in central Indiana and encountered, even in, central Indiana, this notion that I was from nowhere, a backward, ignorant, stupid place. And people corrected my accent, they corrected my whole way of being. And on from there, when Appalachians see ourselves in, in a television show, in a movie, we brace ourselves because it's going to be insulting. It's going to be a hillbilly joke, or it's going to be a poverty documentary. And we're so much more interesting than that. Okay, so you asked, actually, where does this come from? That's a really we could talk for hours about that, but in the immediate, I can tell you that it comes from the centralization of our media. I think that the people who are making our news shows, our deciding what books, what novels get published, that's all in New York. People who make our news are all in big cities all over the country, but in cities. The people who create our television shows and our films are in big cities, mostly Los Angeles. It's all so city people are making our culture, and they care about city things naturally. It's not it's not coming from malice, it's coming from familiarity. You care about, and you want to tell the stories that are meaningful to you. Well, nearly half of us in this country don't live in big cities, so we feel invisible. There's a lot of anger and resentment about the invisibility or the condescension. It's not just Appalachia, it's small town everywhere. Since I published Demon Copperhead, I've heard from people in, Oklahoma, Montana, lots and lots of other small towns saying, "You nailed it. That's how we feel. We feel like the people in charge of stuff are looking down on us." This sense of elitism, this sense that only people who have, expensive, fancy educations are valid citizens and get to make the choices that affect all of us. That the resentment that rural people feel has come to a boiling point, and it's become very dangerous, and it has had very, I'm going to say, disastrous effects on our political life and on our government. When people feel so abandoned, they're ready to just vote for the guy who says, "I'm going to blow up the system," which is a really dangerous thing to do. Um, so I think it comes partly from the concentration of our information sources in cities. It also comes historically from kind of a long-term movement of governments to get people into cities in order to monetize their labor, because people in the country tend to consume what they produce on the spot. Anything from growing corn and making it into whiskey, like moonshine. There was actually a war in the United States, the Whiskey Rebellion, when Washington sent troops into the mountains, into Appalachia, because the people of Appalachia refused to pay taxes on their whiskey, because they're just making it for their own entertainment. There's no money changing hands, so how can you pay tax? See what I mean? So that's just an example of a larger, kind of huge long-term trend to get people into a monetized, into cities to work in factories and so forth. So the propaganda that goes along with that is suggesting that those country people are living, inferior lives. They haven't grown up yet. They haven't really come into the city to have a genuine human experience. So it ends up being a matter of condescension.
Sure. Yeah, I loved that explanation in Demon Copperhead where you kind of talk about the land-based economy and relying on the land versus being in the city. And switching gears a little bit, although, I sense that maybe this is related, but you've talked in previous interviews that self-reliance and interdependence come up often in all of your writing, particularly this tension between relying on just yourself or relying on a larger community, or, relying on the land perhaps and the help of your neighbors. Right now in the United States, at least, the sense is that the individual or self-reliant approach is beating out this community-minded one. Can you elaborate on the ways in which you hope your fiction can kind of steer people to this more community-minded approach, or to seeing the world, or even why a community-minded approach might be something that you should try for?
Yeah, I think that's really insightful. I think if I had to say there's one theme or question or conflict that I write about over and over again in all, I guess, 17 or 18 now of my books, it's that dynamic, that sort of dialectic, that dynamic conflict between the need to be ourselves, to express ourselves as individuals, and the need to belong to our communities and to acknowledge our dependence on the people who've made us. It's funny that in the beginning, I thought I was writing these stories because I'm female, and because I'm an American, a citizen of the US. And both those things are true. I think that our our iconography and our great mythology as people of this country is the mythology of the self-made man, the solo flyer. All of our heroes are, are the Superman who comes in and gets it done all by himself, the person who flies alone across the ocean, the person who saves the day, relying entirely on himself, the cowboy, the lone cowboy, whatever. It's a very male mythology, and also it's a very it's a very incomplete mythology because nobody is self-made. And I grew up really aware of this because I was, being female, I was always, in the kitchen with the women who were making the food, while the men sat at the table talking about the great things that they were going to do, or, what was wrong with the world and how the problems they were going to solve. And I just thought, you're not going to solve anything on an empty stomach, guys. I was always really aware of the, the people behind the people, the fact that we're all so interconnected. We all depend on many, many people, the people who make our clothes, the people who made our furniture, the people who, built the floors that we walk on. And I think some of that, as I got older, I realized some of that is because I'm also a biologist. I was in school. I didn't study writing in school. I never learned how to do that. I studied biology because I thought, I came from a working class place. I thought if you get an education, you got to learn to do something that, you can use to support yourself. So I studied biology, got degrees in ecology and evolutionary biology, which is really all about how all systems are connected. But going back before that, I grew up, playing in the woods, climbing trees, catching, crickets, catching mice, whatever, whatever creature I could catch and study. I grew up understanding that I am one species among many species, and that every breath I take, every intake of oxygen I get was created by those trees outside my window. They're making oxygen, and without him, I'm dead. So I've always had a sense of interconnectedness and how foolish it is to imagine that you are separate from those around and behind you. And finally, so this was my own evolution understanding. This came from this interest in interdependency and in acknowledging community, comes from my background in biology. It comes from being a woman. It comes from being an American and seeing the damage done by these myths of the self-made person, which actually end up, and that's another conversation, causing a lot of shame. If you can't get ahead, then you think something must be wrong with me, because in America, we're all supposed to be able to get ahead. And then ultimately, I've realized it comes from being Appalachian, because if we have one defining feature here, we are people made of community. We belong to our families, to our communities. We're really aware of that, and we talk about it a lot, and we know it.
Yeah. And I'm wondering, like, has the current moment we're in, what we're going through right now as a country, has that changed your perspective on these divisions and the things that divide us? Because, you've been writing about divisions and stereotypes for decades. Your first book, The Bean Trees, explored these themes and came out in the 80s. Is there something different about what we're going through right now? Does it feel unprecedented in any way? And also, like, what do you have in mind for solutions to bring people together? Or are they already together?
Well, I think, two questions. Is what's different now? I would just say that these divisions, these rural-urban divides, have become more extreme, more dangerously extreme. I think the control of our media has become more concentrated in urban places. concerned with urban things, which has made everything worse. We're feeling even more invisible than we used to. I think, maybe like 50 years ago, there were television programs about farmers and about people in small towns, which don't exist anymore. Such a thing would be considered very old fashioned and quaint, I think, now, unsophisticated. So I think the divisions have gotten harder and wider, and there's a lot more anger, which is playing out in really, as I said, dangerous ways in our in our government. People are we sort of people are fueled by resentment rather than goodwill. When people feel um, condescension, when they feel invisible, it doesn't bring out your generosity. I think rural people are known for our generosity. I think, they always say the people who have least to give are most likely to give it. Um, and so I can say that I live, here where I live, which is in one of the reddest, parts of the state of Virginia. A lot of my neighbors don't vote the way I do, but I can also tell you that they are the kindest, most generous people you could imagine. It doesn't just because people voted for a very arrogant, selfish man who's trying to, concentrate wealth in his own pockets and those of his rich friends, doesn't mean that's who they are. They just felt, well, they felt a lack of choice, and they felt a kind of desperation that led to this, and who knows what's going to happen next when they are forsaken by the new Republican government, and they lose their Medicaid and all of that. But there is in as part of this complex of feeling condescension, there's also this feeling that people have here in some of the more poor parts of the country, is we should be able to take care of ourselves. We want to be able to take care of ourselves. We don't want charity. We don't want someone to come from the outside and save us, because the imbalance of power in that is so frustrating and so aggravating. And also, the things that an outsider comes to hand out are likely to be the wrong things.
And, for our audience, who many of them work in philanthropy and nonprofits in that charity that people might not want, what is the best response to this feeling of condescension? You said people are fueled by condescension, not goodwill. How does someone who works in philanthropy or nonprofits get around that?
Well, I think I mean, it's a big question, and there are many answers, but bottom line, the answer is empathy. The answer is compassion. And as a novelist, this is what I feel like is my mission, is to give people literature that allows them to put their own lives aside for, the space of 10 hours or however long it takes to read this book, and go inside the mind of another human who is walking a really different path, who's living a different life with different worries, different threats, different joys, to feel what it's like for a person in New York City, for example, to be able to live the life of this boy who lives in Lee County, Virginia, who is orphaned by addiction, who falls into addiction himself through no intention of his own, just following doctor's orders, to give people compassion across these divides. And likewise, for people here to see themselves and feel more compassion for, maybe for their neighbors who are suffering from the disease of addiction. And I think that's the magic of literature. All literature is, it allows us to experience another human mind, another human life. And when we come back to our own lives, we've been expanded. We have some empathy for a person of a different race, a different gender, a different background. So that's my first line of approach to solving the world's problems, is give people literature that helps broaden their hearts and their minds. Secondly, what we can all be conscious of when we want to help someone else is instead of assuming we know the solution, to ask rather than tell. I think the best projects, the best development projects are those that begin in a community with a conversation inside a community. When people ask, themselves, ask their own people, what do we need? What can we do here that will help us get out of this, to solve this problem or get out of this pit we're in. And everybody at that table or in that meeting might not agree, but the best solutions are going to come out of those conversations rather than a conversation, 100 or 1,000 miles away in a room among people who don't really live the problem themselves.
And I'd love for you to talk a little bit here about your own nonprofit work. You use the proceeds from Demon Copperhead to start a home for women in recovery in the region. So just tell me a little bit more about this work and what drew you to it.
Well, in the process of writing the novel, I needed to learn a lot more about. I mean, I live right here, so it's about my place and my people. But I had to learn a lot more specifics about the foster care system, about these systems that are stretched so thin here that they're failing us. The medical care system, which is inadequate in all of rural America. We don't have enough hospitals or doctors or healthcare. So I needed to talk with the people who are kind of in the trenches, and I needed to talk with people who are struggling with the disease of addiction. I sat down and listened to people who told me about their addiction and recovery journeys, sort of how they were pulled into it, what that life was like for them, how hard it was, how it's a life that nobody chooses, nobody wants, and what it was that helped them come through to the other side. And the more I listened, the more my heart broke, and the more I understood that of all of the things we don't have enough of here in Appalachia, probably the most important one is recovery services, because this epidemic uh, was visited on us. This plague came down to us from Purdue Pharma when they, targeted us quite deliberately to pump in their very addictive painkiller, OxyContin, and then left us with generations of problems. And the so so when this book was successful and when royalties came from it, I thought, well, Lee County gave me this story. I need this story to give back to Lee County. So what do we do? So I started with a conversation. All of my friends in the recovery community, I called together, invited them to breakfast. We sat at a table at Applebee's, and I just listened. I said, and these were people who are physicians, nurses, people who run rehab programs, people in rehab programs. What do we need? And the sort of clear conclusion, everyone agreed, was what we need the most is a bridge of safety between when people get out of rehab or drug court. They often have, okay, they've been sober for however long, a day or a week or a month. They usually have no family or community or friends that they can depend on, because those are the people who are, who sort of pulled them into addiction in the first place. So no community, no job, no skills, no transportation, usually no driver's license, no place to live. When you walk out on the street with nothing, you have no resilience to resist falling back into addiction, because staying sober is hard work, and it's hard to do when you're having to work just to survive. It's impossible to do. So what we need is a way to give these people a roof over their heads and a chosen family of people who support their sobriety, and a home that offers transportation, skills, the chance to get their GED, the chance to get job training. So that's what we need, recovery homes, especially for women who are, the sort of the anchors of their families. So I said, okay, let's make a recovery home for women. What I can do, I have, just a fistful of cash here. What I can do is buy a house, but that doesn't make it a home. What we need to make it a recovery community is a community. So we all of those people at that table called all of their people, and we came together. We formed a board of directors. We wrote grants. We're finding ways, to sort of pull in every kind of support to make this, a good solid recovery home. And it happened, and it's already full, and we're already looking to expand.
And so you talked a little bit at the top of the interview about this people feeling like they're being condescended to, the media, other institutions, condescending to folks in rural communities, and it's something that comes up in Deemer Copperhead. Mostly, he talks about the media and how it doesn't see Appalachians as full people. Um, I'm wondering how philanthropy and organizations that offer social services, I'm wondering if they're guilty of the same thing, particularly from your perspective as someone who's running a nonprofit. Like, is this condescension coming from philanthropy and nonprofits, and how? So,
Well, it can be. It's, I mean, with it can happen in spite of the best of intentions. It just comes from a misunderstanding, or a failure to understand how shame sort of works as a part of this. Shame is a huge part of the cycle of poverty. Um, and it goes back to this great American myth that anybody in America can get ahead if they work hard enough, if they're smart enough. I mean, we get brainwashed with that from 1,000 different directions. And so you can't help but feel, if you are poor, if you aren't getting ahead, if you can't take care of your kids, you feel you've failed, and you feel it's your fault because this is America. You should have done better. So that internalized shame really, it prevents people it impedes their access to many possibilities. They feel like, oh, I must not be smart enough to go to school, so I won't go to school. I must not be a hard worker. I wouldn't be able to get that job, so I won't even try. So when someone comes along, wanting to help, remember that the first emotion someone's going to feel is shame. Like, oh, I'm a bad person because I have to take your hand out. That's the starting point. So to have some compassion for that, and to ask instead of tell, what do you have to give? What's the best thing about you? What do you have to offer, in exchange for what you need? To suggest that this isn't a one-way street. I think some of the best models of philanthropy, or support for development, are those who come in, and instead of telling, they ask. They say, what could you do here? What could you women in this village do? What would you like to do? What are you good at that could help you have more food, or have more education for your kids, or whatever. Maybe they all say, well, I could raise chickens, I could sell eggs. The ideas should come from the people who are in development, because that's going to start with, I think I could do that.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I'm wondering, like, and this is my last question, but you offered some solutions for how to get around this condescension. But if philanthropy, like other institutions, isn't seeing Appalachians as full people, how should it act? And I'm also wondering how this connects to, you talked about media and other elite institutions being concentrated in urban areas, which have their own problems, but are far away from the problems that folks in rural areas might be
Yeah,
experiencing. So
yeah.
what are some good models to get around that condescension or get around that distance that's just inevitable and where these media and philanthropy are concentrated?
Well, I would say it starts with listening and spending time. But it just if you want to help uh, people in a region of the country that's different from yours, you need to learn about them first. You need to give them a chance to represent themselves. I think that all of our media, our news media, our entertainment media, would do well to think a little harder or a lot harder about the half of the people in this country who aren't represented, to give them credit for having interesting lives and significant problems that people need to know about. So it starts with just attention and listening.
And are there certain, and this is definitely my last question now, but are there certain initiatives that can be funded? I mean, you talked about how your fiction is a way for people to see others, to foster empathy. Are there is would you say like fund the arts or fund fiction like yours, or where should money be going?
Well, a lot of different places, and there are tiers of support. I mean, emergency aid, that's another whole thing. I mean, if children are dying of starvation, yeah, first feed the kids. I mean, you don't have to go and ask the baby, are you starving? Tell me about that. Okay, there's emergency aid. The urgent, there's disaster relief after a hurricane. Those kinds of aid, obviously just need to happen quickly. After that, I would say, listen to people who are doing it for themselves. If you're interested in, let's say, kind of long-term hurricane relief, we were hit very badly here where I live by Hurricane Helene, and many communities are still in recovery from that. They're still rebuilding. They're still working to sort of just make kind of restore their communities to health. So if you're interested in that, find the nonprofits that are working locally, like the Red Cross of Southwest Virginia is Southwest Virginians, or and so forth. And if they have, if their website says please donate, then donate. Your money will not be considered condescension because the people there have already made the decisions about how it would be spent. The donate button doesn't say, tell us what you want to buy for our community. It says, we'll handle that. We appreciate your money. Everybody feels pulled different ways, but and right now, I mean, everybody is suffering. The arts are being defunded. Arts organizations have lost their support. Scientific research has lost its support. I mean, we're getting kneecapped in this country because the government has decided that all of our wealth should go to wealthy people, and forget the rest. So that's a scary moment, and every everybody needs help right now. We're in a sort of a national emergency. I think that the climate emergency is being ignored. The safety of our national parks is at risk. All of our, so many things sort of at every level. Our protection from pollution is being taken away. So I think everybody, just about everybody in this country belongs to some community that needs help. So just, find where your heart is and give what you can.
Well, I think that's a great note to end on. That's all the time we have. Thank you, Barbara, so much for talking this through with me. It was a really fascinating conversation. Thank you, everyone, for joining the conversation. We hope you tune in to future episodes of Commons and Conversations. And in the meantime, you can visit the Commons at philanthropy.com/the Commons. So thanks for joining.